So Antec's kind of been on a roll this year. I mean, we looked at the C8 Constellation, which is actually housing my work PC now. Was actually really good for a dual chamber case, but kind of follows the standard formula these days of dual chamber cases. Fast forward to the Flux series, and the Flux Pro, which I also use as a workstation PC case, is like absolutely insane how good of a cooling chassis that it is for any arrangement of hardware, including the highest core count CPUs and biggest GPUs that you can imagine. So we're gonna see now whether or not Antec can kind of keep on keeping on, if you will, with kind of knocking them out of the park with their latest case, which is an SFF, or a small form factor, the Performance 1M. All right, so huge thanks to Antec for sending over this case and a couple of other the accessories to take a look at for today's kind of build video, if you will. SFF is interesting. They come in all, like there's some things that are like considered small form factor that don't really seem like they're that small. And then you can go all the way down to some like really tiny, like 5-liter cases. This one kind of is in the middle. So it is an ITX chassis, but one of the things that you typically have to compromise with something small form factor is you're kind of shoehorned into a very traditional layout. You're very shoehorned into the size of the components that you can fit in there. Like for instance, if you want to put a AIO or you want to go with a larger GPU, you kind of have to choose one or the other. But the 1M is actually different in the sense that it has modularity. So you can actually, and there's extra side panels in here that are optional. I kind of want to show these off today too. But they allow you to sort of customize the layout to have the most efficient use of space for whatever your build is going to be. So it can accommodate wider GPUs, it can accommodate bigger CPU coolers, and you can sort of fine tune the way that the chamber is laid out so that you can get the best of whatever your particular needs are. Now it's available in 2 different colors, black with red accent on the inside, as you can see here, and aventurine. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. It's more of like a gunmetal color. Can't really show that one off today because I don't have it on hand. But one of the things that makes this kind of unique and different from a lot of other cases is the fact that it's not stamped steel, which is kind of like the norm for mass production. This is actually CNC milled aluminum. So the quality of this is already, it definitely feels a lot more solid in the hand because of the fact that it is CNC'd aluminum. So let me, and you might notice too, when it comes to ventilation, they were like, yo, we heard the industry likes mesh or grills, but it's not a super fine mesh, so the airflow through here is gonna be nuts. And every single panel on here, I guess with the exception of the front, is see-through because it is just all mesh. It's kind of crazy actually. We got a little pull tab right here, which is to help us open the chassis up, just like that. So here's the top piece. You can kind of see the quality of that anodized aluminum. So it is anodized. We've got a magnet on the back right here, and then 2 tabs on the front. So that's how this attaches. You just kind of put it under and snaps in there, and then pop it up to get it out. Dude, look at how like bold and brilliant that red anodizing is inside. Again, this is a full aluminum chassis, anodized, so it's not gonna like flake off, it's not powder coating, it is actually dyed metal. If anyone knows what anodizing is, and you know that this is actually some pretty good quality anodizing right here. I can tell by just the sheen that's on it. So the case measurements actually are 424 millimeters by 175 millimeters by 260 millimeters. Max GPU length that can accommodate is 350 millimeters or less in length. And the CPU cooler max height is going to depend on where you actually have the middle bar here. So you can go up to 85 millimeters in height with the 40 millimeter max GPU thickness setting, or you can go up to 78 millimeters of GPU with 47 millimeters max CPU height. So what that means is, as you can see, it's a dual chamber case. So we're gonna have on this side right here our motherboard and potentially our cooler, which in this case, we would want to use like a downfire or something like that. Because of the fact that we have the fans on the bottom, we wouldn't want the AIO radiator on the bottom. That'd be bad for the pump. But as you can see, this can move left or right. So we've got these set screws here and here, actually on all 4 sides. And we even have a little like ruler built in. That way you can make sure that you're lining it up straight. That way it's not all crooked and such. But if you want more CPU max height clearance, you scoot this into the GPU side, taking up some of the GPU clearance. So if you're running a thick like triple slot GPU, You can make sure that you have plenty of room for that, and then obviously it's going to depend on how much you move it, on how much CPU height that you have. And it does have 1, 2, 3, 4 adjustable like default stop locations, and that's how they're getting the measurements that they're mentioning. Yeah, so again, the panels just pop out. They're just held in by little ball nubs, if you will, so they just snap right into the side of the case right here. If you want to install the fans on the bottom, which is the only place you can install fans on this actually, pull the bottom feet off, and there we have access to being able to install either 2 120 millimeter fans or 2 140 millimeter fans. Now I would recommend 140 millimeter fans on this instead of the 120s, simply because you can't fit 3 120s. It's just a little bit too short for that. But 2 140s is going to move more CFM than 2 120s. Now 2 120s could have a little bit more static air pressure. Not really necessary when you have mesh that's that thick or open on the porosity. So it's going to be pretty much wide open airflow. And this entire chassis is designed essentially to be a fully bottom to top airflow design. So keep that in mind when you're doing your cooler selections and such on this. Now it is a mini ITX motherboard only, so not an MATX. It is mini ITX. It's also SFX or SFXL when it comes to the power supply. But what we have here are a couple optional side panels. The problem when you go with a full mesh case like this is if you put a tempered glass side panel on, you're losing an entire side of potential intake or exhaust. So they came up with this. Half tempered glass, half mesh. So this is kind of nice because now let's say you want to be able to see inside your case, but also maintain some decent airflow. There you go. You got tempered glass and mesh. Yeah, you might be losing a good 2/3 of the mesh to glass, but you're not losing all of it. And because the fans are down here on the bottom, if they're pulling air in, this could potentially be another source of intake for the GPU specifically, because the GPU is on this side right here. But that's if you want to take a look at your nice, beautiful GPU, or flip it around to the other side to take a look at your motherboard, CPU, RGB, and all that sort of stuff. So symmetrical designs like this are nice because they give you all kinds of options on, I want to see my GPU. No, I want to see my CPU. You can make it a left-facing system, a right-facing system. This right here is just the full tempered glass side panel, which I just mentioned. So if you're like, nope, I want to go with the full tempered glass look on one side, you can do that. I do believe, honestly, on the CPU side, this would be fine. This would be fine if you're running, I guess it depends on the kind of cooler that you're running. Actually, if you're running like a little downfire cooler or something, you would probably, I'd still recommend leaving the mesh on here. You're still gonna see your RGB lighting and stuff through there. You are gonna be feeding cool air up to it from the bottom, so I don't think this would necessarily hurt thermals too much. But it's one of those things where if you can have max cooling, I would err on the side of caution and just go with max cooling. Okay, so one thing I want to kind of talk about here before we start the build is, for instance, the power supply mount. You can see right here, it's mounted in the lowest position right now. That's this black bracket here. It does have an extension cable that basically has to be plugged in to the power supply since it's in the middle of the chassis, which allows you to be able to plug it in right here. So it's just an extension power cable. It does have 2 positions though. It's currently in the lowest position. If you were doing an SFXL, you could bring it up slightly and get a little bit more length before you interfere with anything at the bottom. I am going to be installing 2 of their Nova fans that they provided us. So these do kind of daisy chain, which will be nice. So it keeps our cable management a little bit less cluttered. We do also have this little tray right here, which is kind of nice. It's even got a little zip tie, like Velcro on here. So if you were to install any sort of a fan controller, RGB controller, it gives you a place to be able to mount it and easily access it right here on the front of the chassis. Since it's not being used for anything, there's no air intakes or anything here. This is a solid panel. Man, I wish we could like mount it like this though, to be honest. That would have been cool, because then I would have taken up even less space. So let's go ahead and build in this real quick. I'm kind of sad. I don't have anything modern to put in here necessarily for ITX boards. I need to get some. I need to get some like B650 boards or something. But this is an old 9900K. Actually, this is Phil's old 9900K setup. This is his old board and CPU and everything. But it's a correct form factor to allow us to build in this, kind of come up with any ideas on maybe some potential improvements, and to allow us to really kind of play with the adjustment of the middle panel, if you will. because I think we're gonna try and throw a 4080 Strix in here, because that's the biggest card we have on hand. And although they show an FE on the box, I wanna see if we can fit it. If not, we'll see what the biggest card we can fit in here is. So let's start building a small form factor PC. Okay, so there we go. Got a pretty straightforward build in there. Take it back apart real quick. I was able to fit, as you can see, the Strix 4080 because it is the biggest card we have. So it doesn't matter if it's a 4080, 4080 Super, or 4090, the Strix are like all the same size. So as long as it's a 350 millimeter length or shorter GPU, you're gonna be able to fit it. This GPU, as you can see, if you look at the back, has a lot of extra height. So even with that extra height, I was able to get the 12 volt high power connector in there without putting a crazy bend on it and still be able to clear the top and have no interference with any other parts or components inside, which is nice. Mostly because all the fans are on the bottom. So if we had top fans or something, it could get tight up here, but there are no top fans. I'm kind of hoping that Antec, because they are hinting at like modularity and future accessories to come out for this. So something that would be neat is maybe if they came up with a taller top that fans mount to it, so you could help with some exhaust fans on the top. That would be nice, because we only have the two 120s on the bottom for the intake. The Nova fans, by the way, first time I've ever taken a look at these, I'm actually very impressed with them. The build quality, the brushed metal hub, it's just, in terms of aesthetics, it's a very pleasing looking fan. I'm not sure what kind of plastic it is, but it's got this kind of like a grain in it. It almost looks like metal. It's not metal, but it kind of looks like it. I'll be excited to kind of play with these fans some more and see how their performance is, but just the fact that they come with an inline controller, which I'm not using here, they are daisy chained together and hooked in directly to the motherboard on the other side. Now I did set the GPU as inset as possible, which means I took away every bit of CPU cooler clearance that we had, because as you can see, I'm running the Be Quiet low profile Dark Rock LP, or the low profile. It's only a 100 watt cooler, so I need to make sure that my CPU is not pushing its limits or anything. That's one of the biggest things you gotta take in mind with this case is cooler size. So if you were going to go with a larger downfire cooler, which would maybe have heat pipes that come up and then a fan on top of that, as you can see, we're pretty close to the exterior of the case right now, with it set just about as far on the GPU thickness as it can go. So you want to make sure that you're not getting a cooler that's too big. So as you can see, when it comes to this particular ITX board, that cooler barely fit in there anyway. In between the RAM and the top VRM cooler, well, over here, the top VRM cooler and then the IO shield. So it barely fit in there. And considering the fact that that's a 9900K, which I believe is a 125 watt CPU, we would want to make sure that we dial in those power settings so that we keep it without, throttling itself. But because it's getting fresh cold air blown directly on it, at least being pulled in directly through the case, that's going to help quite a bit. Now I opted to put the fan for the power supply to pull cool air in directly through the outside. If I had flipped this, the motherboard tray does have a giant opening right there, because as we know, pretty much every 40 series card and some 30 series cards and a lot of AMD cards today are blow-through design. So what that means is the air is going through the card, and instead of having to make a 90-degree turn to go out the fins on the top and the bottom, it just goes straight through the card. So in this instance here, we still have a pretty decent gap between that back wall. So you can see between the GPU and that back wall, to where air that's being blown up through the bottom of the chassis will help that air make the turn to go out the top of the case. So I kind of had to decide, Did I want hot air from the GPU blowing directly into the PSU, or did I want the PSU to always have a fresh air supply? So that's kind of a compromise that you can decide. This PSU is actually a little small for this build. It's a 750 watt SFX PSU, and this is a 4080. So technically we would want an 850 watt to be safe, but considering the fact that it's a platinum rated power supply, I think it'd be able to handle this particular GPU and CPU combo just fine. But if we were to throw something in here like a 4080 Super or even a 4090, I think 4080 Super is the same TDP as a 4080, but like a 4090 with say, oh, I don't know, any 13th or 14th gen CPU, it wouldn't be enough PSU. But fortunately, you can get SFX-L PSUs now up to 1200 and 1300 watts. So it's kind of nuts. Now we had more than enough room to be able to run our cables underneath the PSU without interfering with our fans. So I've got them just kind of zip tied into a loop, and then they clear our fans just fine. They spin without any sort of impact. And I still have all kinds of room up top. I have all this space right here I could utilize for more cable management if I needed to. And because the orientation of this power supply puts the cables down, it's kind of nice that we don't have to worry about bunching everything up here on top, which a lot of other SFX cases or SFF cases do. They put the plugs on the top and then the power plug on the bottom, which is backwards from the way I think it should be, which means our 24 pin doesn't have to make a crazy bend up and then over and then down. It just kind of goes straight across and then up. So the longest cable I have in here is actually the 12 volt high power, because the PSU that I'm using is not an ATX 3.0 or a PCIe Gen 5 power supply. So this is using a 12 volt high power 2 dual PCI Express standard 8-pin plug into this PSU, but it was kind of perfect. I just sort of doubled up the cable over here to kind of get it shorter and out of the way. Plenty of space, and then I have enough slack right here to where if I ever need to, take out my GPU, I've got plenty of slack to be able to unplug it. The cable just sort of pops out of the way right there. And I'm not, as you can see, I'm not putting a crazy bend on the cable. So the bend is more back here and not at the plug, because we want to make sure we avoid any sort of the 12 volt high power, excess bends at the plug, which is highly, highly recommended not to do just because of plug safety. One of the reasons why I pushed the GPU as far towards the motherboard side or CPU side as possible is I wanted a little bit of volume of air or cushion of air in front of the fans, not for cooling reasons, but for acoustic reasons. The closer the fans are to a grill like this, the more turbulence or chopping sound you can get with the blades as they're really close to the grill. So by moving it inset means I can have a cushion of air in front of it that will silence the blades quite a bit more than if they're right up against that. But let's take a look right now at what the additional side panels look like. So if I were to, and I wouldn't recommend this on the PSU side, but if I were to put this guy right here, you can see this would give us a very nice, pretty view of our graphics card. And we do, like I said, have a cushion of air in between there. I can get my fingers in between there. And the bottom fans could help with the cooling by getting air up in there. This wouldn't be ideal for cooling our GPU. If we had a thinner GPU, like a 2-slot and not a 3-slot like we have here, actually I think it's almost like 3.5-slot GPU. If we had like a more standard sized GPU, I would feel fine with leaving the glass on so you could see it. But because this is a high-end, high-power GPU, I wouldn't recommend this. So the same thing obviously goes for the full glass side panel. It's pretty, but it's not the most efficient at cooling. So you can play around with these side panels based on the TDP of your card to determine whether or not this would be causing yourself a disservice to the GPU performance, cooling performance, or if you could just ramp up the bottom fans to bring in way more air and cost yourself more noise, but then you have the aesthetics of being able to clearly see inside the case. Now we're all running the two 120 millimeter Nova fans on the bottom. Two 140s, like I said, would be much more airflow, which means you could then start to run the solid glass side panels without as much of a detriment to cooling. I personally think I would just leave the full grill on all sides, unless I was running low enough power parts to where I wasn't worried about losing an entire side intake or exhaust. Because the nice thing is the GPU, it's fully independent on its own cooling. I mean, it's gonna pull in the freshest air it possibly can from the side. But one other thing we need to do right now, we need to fire this baby up. We need to hear it. We need to just kind of get the full effect by having it powered on. Because right now, it is a chunk of chassis, is the best way to put it. And I'm curious now as to what the acoustics of these Nova fans are. Okay, so one of the things I'm gonna do right now to kind of temperature test the GPU, I'll leave the side panel on. and I'm gonna turn on Heaven. We're gonna be running it at basically 4K. Tessellations at extreme, quality is ultra, and then we have 8x AA. So I'm trying to really push the GPU right now in a rasterization test. But we're gonna see where our hotspot and our GPU temp sort of land. So let's just kind of see where we go. It's all factory fan curve, factory power limits. I didn't touch anything on the GPU, but I have a feeling that we should see some fairly decent temperatures here. Again, it's pulling all the air from right here. Like, I can feel the air actually coming through, and the fans have just barely started turning on. So let's find equilibrium, and then I want to put on the different side panels and see how that kind of affects the temperatures. So as expected, it's doing fine. It's at 53C, stock fan curve, no user profile, more aggressive fans. I mean, I don't know if you can hear it. I can feel the warmth coming out the top, so the bottom fans are definitely assisting with pushing the air up. CPU's in the high 70s, low 80s though. You know, I can't fault the case for that because that's a 100-watt cooler and it's a 150-watt CPU. It's actually pulling 150 watts on load or any sort of like ramping up of the frequency. So that's something you really got to keep in mind with this case is you're going to want to really pay attention to the different heights that are available based on the positioning of the mid plate. So you really want to balance your GPU and your CPU so you can get as much CPU cooler in there as possible. Any GPU cooler is going to be fine in here. We could have pushed the GPU closer to the side panel, as I said, to get more room for a bigger CPU cooler. I don't have any other downfire CPU coolers other than that one. So it's just what I had to put in here. But I would definitely do a little bit more shopping. Noctua sells one. I know for a fact Be Quiet has other low profile coolers. I would get one that has something bigger than a 92mm fan on there, but that means it has to go taller than the motherboard so it can expand out over the top of it and get like a 120 downfire type of CPU fan, which would fit in here, but I don't have one. So that's something to keep in mind in the future. But our max CPU or GPU temp was 53.5, our max hotspot 63.9, and this is looping 4K, 8x MSAA, as well as maxed out tessellation. But let's see now. Now, the GPU is going to basically be fully reliant on the bottom intake fans to help keep it cool. So let's see what happens now after a few minutes. All right, so after a solid 15 minutes or so, you can see we're now sitting at 63.5 core temp and 75.4 hotspot temp with maxes at 65 and 78. So about 12 to 13 degrees hotter with the glass side panel on. You know what though? Like, with the side panel, the vented side panel on, it pretty much is like an open air test bench at that point. This is actually not like 60s. I mean, that's a fair trade if you want to see inside. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, honestly. And let's keep in mind, my bottom fans are set to a pretty silent curve on purpose. So if the CPU was to do something right now that spiked its usage to the point where it needs to ramp up the fans, we actually saw the GPU temp kind of shoots down fairly quickly. So if we wanted to even increase the bottom fan intake speed to get more airflow to the GPU, or even if we were running 140s for more CFM or volume of air, the temps would come down even more. But 64 degrees, I mean, it's a very overbuilt card in terms of its cooling for what it is. But yeah, you could obviously leave the side glass on if you wanted. One last thing to test right now then, I'm gonna let it cool down a little bit more. I wanna see how it does now with the half glass. One last run, let's see what happens. Temperatures are pretty much the same. 64 degrees, 76 degrees on the hotspot. Remember our max temps on the full glass was 65 and 78. So it kind of fluctuates around depending on the part of the test that's running. But yeah, so the half glass, half vent in this particular setup with these parts isn't really doing anything. But yeah, so I'm actually pretty impressed though with the fact that with the full glass on, it was able to stay as cool as it did. And again, these fans on the bottom, they're not moving nearly as much air as you might think because I have them set to pretty low on the fan curve. So let's talk about this. There's some things to think about, and there's some things to maybe look forward to when it comes to this case as well. Okay, so let's have some final thoughts about this chassis. Building in it is actually extremely easy. I've already showed you just how much additional space there is in here for things like even cable management around it. Anyone that's built in a small SFX build knows that the power supply and oftentimes there's not a real thought process that goes behind designing a case with having extra room for cable management and stuff. So clearly Antec has thought of that. The movable middle tray is perfect to allow you to customize how much space you need for the GPU or the CPU. Fattest GPU we own fits in here with room to spare. We could even push it more towards the side panel if we wanted for a bigger CPU cooler, as I already mentioned. Now, they do talk about accessories that are going to be coming out for this case. And the cool thing is they could be very modular with this and change out panels and such as needed. One thing I would love to see is something that allows it to go like this. That is a much smaller footprint on your desk, which would have zero impact on cooling at all in terms of the orientation, especially considering the fact that the only thing that is getting exhausted out the back is a little bit of the GPU cooler right here. But what we need is some sort of a stand that allows us room to get the cables in and out of the bottom. One thing that I would also like to see is for them to maybe actually allow for inverted case feet mount. So you can't take the bottom panel where the feet are and flip it on the top and invert the case to put the fans on the top, say as an exhaust to help pull air out, because of the fact that the top mount and the bottom mount are not symmetrical. But that would have been neat because I would have loved to have tested the effects of maybe, this is backwards, I would have loved testing the effects of having exhaust fans on the top rather than push fans on the bottom. That would have been interesting to see, because then having the vent below the glass on the GPU might have actually helped, because it would be pulling air in from anywhere that it possibly can. So I think that that's, if Antec could find a way to maybe allow for that inverted mount by taking the bottom feet and putting them on top and then flipping it over, I think that would be an interesting test to see. One other thing to mention, once again, as I talked about in the beginning, the build quality feels absolutely rock solid because of the fact that it is full CNC milled aluminum. So we're not dealing with any riveted together parts. It's all screwed together, it's all threaded, it's all countersunk screws. The build quality is very, very stable. There's no flexing, there's no creaking. There is zero flex in this case whatsoever, simply because of the fact that the way that it's designed and screwed together is 100% like triangulated, if that makes sense. So, you know, yeah, the Performance 1M from Antec, I think, first of all, the build quality, my favorite feature about it. It's just, there's something about anodized CNC aluminum that just gives it such a solid feel. But the modularity and like future upgradability that they're really touting. So they're talking about the fact that they could come out with additional fan mounts, different accessory mounts, different front I/O buttons that could be changed out. The idea, because everything is screwed together, they could literally expand this however they wanted. You could potentially, I would assume, whatever they come up with, pie in the sky, they could do. So for instance, we were talking off camera, like, well, how would they expand this? I guess you could unscrew the bottom and the top, maybe have taller front and rear pieces that come with a new side panel that would allow you to then maybe be able to fit an AIO at the top or some exhaust fans at the top. That's why I was mentioning having it be inverted to allow the fans to be at the top as an exhaust would be a nice to have. Having 2 intakes on the bottom and 2 on the top would be that much better. As I mentioned, I'd love for them to see them come up with some sort of a vertical mount, so it's more of a skyscraper orientation rather than, you know, flat on the ground like this. Just because of desk space, that would be a really nice feature. But I think this is where you guys should comment down in the comments below on what kind of expandability you'd like to see on this. I know the red might not be for everyone, but it definitely has a nice bold feel. And it might be the first time that the ROG 4080 Strix card actually fits in a build aesthetically. I've never been a fan of the blue and the red. Blue aside, the red ties in very nicely here. But like I said, we just use that because it's the largest GPU that we have, and clearly it can fit that without any issues whatsoever. But anyway, it's launching literally like right now. So I can't really comment as to what the price is. I can put a pinned comment as to what the price is, because to be honest, I don't know. So that's one aspect I can't really talk to, is value, because value is 100% subjective. But I can tell you that it's very few SFF cases out there that have this level of ease to build in, room to have, you know, high-end parts in here. Again, if you balance the CPU cooler with the GPU cooler to make sure you're getting it just right, so you're not undersized. It's nice to see a company like Antec kind of blast from the past their way into 2024 and say, hold my soda. I got a soda. Why does it sound like Minnesota? From Minnesota. Hold my soda. We're gonna show you guys how to do some case design. So I'm really excited to see what Antec has in the future. But sound off down below how you guys feel about this. I know SFF's not for everybody. If you've ever been to a LAN party or you've ever traveled around with your computer, small form factor can be a lot of fun to play around with. but it can also be a huge headache. Unfortunately, this one was not a big headache to build in. So once again, a huge thanks to Antec for sending us the Performance 1M to take a look at. I'll put some links down in the description below so you guys can kind of go and check out the product website if you want to learn more. And stay tuned for any accessories they come out with. I feel like I'm going to hold them to that because they're really teasing the idea of future-proofing the case by being able to expand or build upon it as needs change in the future, making it kind of a one-case solution for the SFF community anyway. So we got to see some of that innovation. We got to see what they come up with. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.